Hello, Unravelers. Welcome back to Tiff Unraveled. I'm Tiff. If you're new here, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you. Today, we need to go to Brooklyn, New York, obviously one of the most famous boroughs in the world. But unfortunately, today we're not going to be talking about like artisanal coffees and picturesque brownstones. I wish. We're going to Brownsville. This is a neighborhood with a very tough, pretty complex history. It is a place in Brooklyn that has seen its share of struggle and then resilience. But it is here in Brownsville, in an apartment building on Howard Avenue, that this story is unfolding as we speak. It's very heartbreaking. It's very bizarre. It's pretty difficult to wrap your head around. It was for me. This is a story about a little boy who, for all intents and purposes, seemed to be invisible to the world. And it's about his mother who claims he was never even there at all, never existed, she says. It's a very baffling disappearance of a young boy named Jacob Pritchett. Let's unravel. So still in my scrubs. Didn't have a whole lot of time or of extra energy today, but I just really wanted to talk about this. I have a feeling that it's going to be pretty important. And of course, if you know me, I'm going to touch on a few, maybe what I would consider systemic failures, just again, the things that I think are pretty important for us to talk about. And that's what I'm going to do. But we're going to start with Jacob. Jacob is this little boy living in a world that for him is largely silent. Jacob is autistic and he's nonverbal. And this is so critical to understand. Jacob can't tell you his name. Jacob can't tell you if he's hungry. He can't tell you if he's scared. He can't cry out for help in a way that most of us would understand. He is completely and solely dependent on his 50-year-old mother. Jacob is 11 years old, by the way. For the people living in this neighborhood, he was a familiar but like distant presence. He was kind of just known to everybody as like a little boy that they frequently saw in the window of his home, right? Behind this pane of glass. One of the neighbors, in a lot of the reports that I've read, one of the neighbors, her name is Crystal Burrell. She has given a description that has kind of come to define this case so far. And Crystal said, quote, "I would always see a little boy in the window playing with his toys by himself, making noise." And that's kind of a poignant image, isn't it? It's a child alone, his entire world kind of framed by this window, and his only connection to the outside world being like the eyes of his neighbors. But then apparently, from what I'm reading, sometime during this past summer, neighbors started noticing that that window went dark. The little boy was gone. They weren't seeing him there anymore. And Crystal Burrell finished her thought with this very chilling realization, quote, "And since all of this has taken place, he's not in the window no more. I haven't seen him like all summer," unquote. And so weeks of not seeing Jacob turn into months of not seeing Jacob. And the neighbors actually start to grow concerned. And that concern went from a whisper to a roar. And finally, they made the call that brought the authorities to this address on Howard Avenue for a wellness check. And this is where the story kind of takes a very sharp turn. Tragic because it is, too surreal. It's strange. The first to arrive were workers from New York's Administration for Children's Services, or ACS. They showed up to this home on September 25th, but were reportedly met by a lot of resistance from Jacob's mother. And by the end of last month, just a few weeks ago, ACS had opened a formal case against her. And then finally, earlier in the week, they returned. And this time they returned with the NYPD. So officers and social workers arrive at this home. And when they entered the apartment, they found Jacob's mother, but they did not find Jacob. He was nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. They obviously start asking her, "Ma'am, where's your son?" And her response is something that I cannot imagine these officers will ever forget. This woman looked at these police officers and told them she didn't have any children. She insisted repeatedly that 11-year-old Jacob Pritchett does not exist. Can you even imagine? Can you even imagine the police are in this home to check on what they feel may be a vulnerable child, and his mother is flat out denying his entire existence? Who is this Jacob you speak of? I don't know anybody by that name. Imagine. I read a lot of like psychological thrillers, and that's what this reminds me of, something straight out of one of my books. But here's the kicker. While she is spinning this unbelievable story, police are, looking around the apartment. And what do they find while they're looking around? They find Jacob's birth certificate. Talk about receipts. This is the ultimate receipt. Ma'am, your name is right here listed as his parent. What do you mean? So let's talk about the apartment. The apartment itself tells its own grim story. In this case, it's described as being in a, quote, neglected condition, unquote. And crucially, it had no electricity at all. And it wasn't just a messy home. It was a household that was kind of in crisis, right? It was an unstable and frankly unsafe environment for any child, but let alone a child with Jacob's profound needs, right? So you have the mother's like bizarre denial. You have the state of the home. And this at this point is enough, more than enough for police to get a search warrant. And they do. Also brought in a canine unit. And this is when the absolute worst fears in this case kind of start to take shape. So the police dog, this canine, this dog is trained to detect human remains, right? Cadaver dogs. It signaled the presence of human blood, and it signaled it right on or near the refrigerator. I mean, just let all of this sink in, right? The mom says the boy isn't even real, but his birth certificate's in the house, and now we have a canine unit that's smelling blood near the fridge. Obviously, police at this point launch a massive search for this little boy, for Jacob. They went through the apartment. They went through the building's like yard, the yard around the apartment complex. They went through nearby dumpsters. Still no sign of Jacob. And in the days that have followed this week, they have sealed that apartment door. And it's kind of, maybe it's just a little bit of speculation, but it seems like maybe the police are operating under the strong presumption that someone met an untimely end in that apartment, even though we still can't find Jacob. So what happened to Jacob's mother? She was taken into custody. She was actually transported to a local hospital for a psychiatric evaluation as an emotionally disturbed person. And as of the latest reports that I could find anyway, she's actually still there, and her name has not been released publicly, and no charges have been filed against anyone in connection with Jacob's disappearance so far. This kind of really creates sort of an investigative nightmare, in my opinion, right? That there's one person right now that I'm pretty sure knows exactly what happened to Jacob. I'm sure, again, just speculating, she's the main person of interest here. But right now she's an inaccessible witness. And it kind of just leaves this massive black hole right at the center of this entire case. That's where we are investigative wise, case wise. That's all there is. This is active and ongoing right now. But you know me. Let's talk about how a child can just disappear. Jacob's case is another massive flashing red light signaling in my opinion, a series of profound systemic failures. What's the biggest one right now? In my opinion, the biggest one is that investigators have discovered that Jacob was never enrolled in a public school. Think about that. For most kids, right, school is a safety net. In fact, unfortunately, sometimes it's the primary safety net outside of the home. It's where they are seen every single day by teachers and school nurses and counselors, right? All of whom are mandated reporters, right? All of these people are legally required to report any signs of abuse or neglect. And without Jacob ever having been enrolled in a public school ever, that entire layer of protection vanishes. And Jacob had no one checking on him. No one. Now, do not get me wrong. Homeschooling is a perfectly legal and valid choice. I homeschool one of my own daughters. But in New York City, much like my own county, there are rules, right? Every single year with the county, you have to file, and reading New York City's rules again, almost right in line with my own city. Every year we have to file what's called a letter of intent with the school system. And we have to let them know that we do have a child living in this county, but that we are choosing to provide at-home instruction. We even have to provide why we're capable of doing so. We have to provide the curriculum that we're going to be teaching that year. We have to, there is a lot of paperwork involved, and they check on these kids every single year. They want to see grades. They want to see SOL scores. They still have to even take state tests and all of those things. They keep up with these kids. For a child with special needs, now this is in New York, this is what I read in New York. For a child with special needs, like Jacob is, the parent is also required to submit a written request for services to the city's, this is a tongue tie, to the city's Committee on Special Education by June 1st, according to their mandates every year. Okay, so here's the failure. The system there is passive. It appears to wait for a parent to file the paperwork. So if that parent chooses not to, then that child has become completely invisible. There is no automatic alerts that flag a child who has turned 6 years old, right, has so far not been enrolled in school or registered as a home instructed student. And now this child is falling through the cracks. That's what's happening. And it creates a perfect storm of vulnerability. You have here, in this case, a nonverbal child who cannot speak up for himself. You have a caregiver who was now presenting this really bizarre information and trying to mislead investigators by saying that this child doesn't even exist. And then you have a system, right, with procedural gaps that obviously can delay intervention that may have been needed, probably was needed, speculation only, long before this ever happened, long before Jacob ever went missing. My guess is there probably should have been intervention a long time ago. So when ACS first showed up, like I said, they were met with resistance at that time, but it took at least a week, maybe even more, for this to escalate into like a full police search. And in cases like this, I just really feel like time is absolutely everything. The only reason that we know about Jacob at all right now is because his neighbors and his community were his safety net in this case. And they were the only ones. And the only reason they noticed was because they noticed an empty window. They didn't even know this as a child who would play outside in the streets with the other neighborhood kids. Like, it was just something that they had grown accustomed to seeing, was this kid in the window in the home. And, while I I'm so grateful that the neighbors finally were like, something's up, he's not there and he's always there. And they made the call. And while I'm so grateful that they did that, like, it shouldn't fall on private citizens to be like the first and last and only line of defense for a child that we have an entire system that is supposedly built to protect. But I don't know. The question remains. Obviously, it's haunting the entire neighborhood of Brownsville right now. And that question is, where is Jacob Pritchett? Jacob Pritchett is an 11-year-old Black male, medium complexion, brown eyes, black hair. The NYPD has released a sketch of him. I'm going to put that right here. I mean, they desperately need our help, everyone's help. Somebody out there, somebody has to know something. Somebody has to have seen something. But really quickly, before I give you guys the numbers and the information, I also, and maybe nobody else will, maybe I'm thinking too hard, but why do we only have a sketch of this child? Like, why in 11 years of this boy's life, or at least in recent years, do we have no pictures of this boy? Did the mother not have any pictures, photos anywhere of this child, that we're relying on a police sketch? I don't know. It's just a sad detail to me, and I could be totally off base, but I find it sad. Anyway, so here we go. If you, anyone, please give this video a like, give the video a share. It really does help just kind of get these kinds of videos out and get people talking about them. And the farther the reach, the more likely it is to strike a chord with someone who just may have seen something and not known what they had seen until they realize by, seeing something about this that, they know something. If anyone has any information, and I swear, no matter how small or how insignificant you feel like details you have may be, come forward. You can call the NYPD's Crime Stoppers hotline at 1-800-5TT-TIPS. So it's 1-800-5TT-8477. For Spanish, the number is actually 1-888-577-4782. You can also submit tips online at crimestoppers.nypdonline.org or on X, formerly Twitter, at NYPD Tips. And as always, you can remain completely anonymous. Listen, bottom line, before I sign off for the evening, Jacob Pritchett deserves to be found. He deserves for this story to be told, and he deserves for the truth of whatever has happened to him to come to light. So let's not let the last memory of Jacob Pritchett be, the boy who used to be in the window. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I love you all so much. I'll see you very soon. Until I do, please stay safe, keep asking questions, and keep unraveling. Love you.